Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Welcome back to the ANEW Insight Podcast. We are back for the second half of our interview with holistic trauma therapist Seema Sharma. Seema gave us some invaluable insight into the role of consciousness in healing trauma. I cannot wait to pick her brain some more. Welcome back, Seema.
Thank you.
So, I know that consciousness, we've talked about this in the last section. I think for some people it's still pretty abstract. How do you utilize transpersonal research itself to guide you?
Yeah, transpersonal research has been probably one of the most exciting things that I was introduced to. And there are things that come out, not necessarily in my specialty or what I've been focusing on, but, some from my colleagues and some from my cohort members and everyone else around me that broaden my, perspective of what can truly be.
Mm-hmm.
And so using and constantly looking at transpersonal research allows us to know that when a client comes in and talks about something, it may not be a pathology, but an actual experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps us parse out, what's going on and what's an actual event for a client compared to what may be a struggle for them related to pathology.
Give them an example of that. Like, say, I'm assuming you're saying something like hearing a voice, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, a really common one is I get a lot of people with schizoaffective disorder, which is basically like they've had an hallucination and they're pretty adamant that this was true and this happened and they've been adamant about it for a long time, being diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder when in fact it was a spiritual transcending experience that was spiritual in nature and it doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
So what we know is looking at that, we're able to go through transpersonal research and understand that that was an actual experience and actually discounting that or actually telling my client that I don't believe in that is harm.
Yes. But how can you help them understand that that was real and not schizoaffective, and just tell people exactly what schizoaffective is if they don't know what that is?
Schizoaffective is basically they've got a lot of hallucinations. It could be auditory, visual, or disorganized speech. So they've got one of those in addition to some oddities related to like what they're saying. Sometimes it could be like they feel like someone's put something in their brain and, someone's controlling their brain or something like that. So it's something that's really out there. And I notice that a lot around spiritual experiences. Another one is like near-death experiences, which is I'm going to use because it's easier for me to explain this. Like someone's had a near-death experience. We know from transpersonal research there are 5 signs of near-death experiences. And so we can go through our research and look at the 5 stages of a near-death experience.
What are they?
Yeah, it is, like seeing the light, meeting someone that they may not know, sometimes having a conversation. And it varies. Chris Rowe is the greatest researcher on that, and he's done a lot of research out of the UK. He was our psychopathology teacher at CIS. And, like there's the 5 stages, like meaning making and then coming back. So these are all the stages, and off of my top of my head, this is what I'm remembering. But when someone comes in and they're deviating from that, and he's done case study after case study on this, like we know that that may be pathology as opposed to an experience. So there are actual assessments that we have. There's actual, ways that we look at various experiences through research that's been quantified or, categorized. So we know like, okay, this has 5 stages. Do they have 5 stages?
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what if it's, they're having an auditory or a visual hallucination? is there a test that you can do that determines whether or not that's true, or if it's, an aspect of consciousness that's coming through to them?
Yeah, I would want to look at other behavior. So in addition, like, is this an isolated event? Is this causing them suffering in other ways? Is this putting their life in danger? If it is, then I would actually look at the diagnosis as maybe being accurate, as opposed to it not being accurate. We're not saying that someone's coming in and they're always inaccurate. They could be accurate. But we want to be able to parse that through. And I think that's why quite a few clients come to us, is because they've had an experience and they don't feel like they can go anywhere else. Wow.
That is fascinating. And if it is a part of consciousness and it isn't a hallucination, what do you see happen with the client?
I think just validating that it is an experience and allowing them, validating that they had this experience is so healing. The very act of validating that for them, they are incredibly moved and change. I see rapid change in people because you validate an experience that they've had.
Right. Where they may have had a history of being told that they're just crazy.
Yeah.
They may actually be having a real connected experience with consciousness. And give us a picture of that. Like, why would they be hearing a voice?
Yeah, actually, it's funny that, 81% of humans on this planet will have some sort of, we call it the psi experience, PSI experience, which is a experience that can't be explained by material science, which is mass, matter, that sort of things, anything tangible. This is the non-physical. So 81% of humans on this planet will have some sort of experience like that. So the probability of that being accurate is huge. So leaving space for that is key. And, allowing our clients to define what that is for them is also valuable, because it all comes down to their meaning and purpose that's creating for them.
Right. Why do you think that there is so much stigma with this kind of work? I mean, you would hear, oh, that's woo-woo talk, or, that's way out there, and it's squashed. I mean, I think you saw this with your, work in the Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah.
Kind of a categorical denial of anything that's not tangible or real. Why is that?
I think, what's happened scientifically is our books haven't been updated with newer versions of science. For example, quantum theory.
Yes. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. So quantum entanglement, quantum theory, everything by Nikola Tesla, Einstein. Our books still don't reflect the sciences that came out during that era. Time-space continuum, and all of those pieces have been proven by science. We do know that there is quantum entanglement. That means one molecule is connected as a fabric to another. That is the science behind what we think is woo-woo. But it isn't taught in our schools. It isn't taught to psychologists. Most people don't even learn about that. Because it goes against some of the foundational things that we know, like systems theory. And these organizations that have created, systems and approaches would be negated if we brought in electromagnetic theory. And
how so?
Well, for example, like systems theory if you were to recognize quantum theory, you would have to recognize non-local consciousness. You would have to recognize that people, like psychokinesis, the movement of things with our minds, not necessarily huge like the media portrays, but there is the ability to do that in a vacuum by a little movement. And they've shown that a couple of times. You would also have to recognize channels and mediums and all of those folks that have been pushed out to the outskirts because there is science that supports them. And that would question who we are as humans on this planet.
But, I mean, if it's been proven and, it is this emerging field, I get that there is backlash, but why would it be quashed?
Yeah.
What is so threatening about this information?
That is the biggest conversation to be had. Because what we're now saying is, like non-local consciousness also means the brain is not responsible for personality, for thoughts, for emotions. The entire field of psychology would be questioned in various ways, like cognitive behavior therapy would be threatened because we would be talking about like that's not necessarily created by the brain. A great book is Consciousness Primary that talks about this. It talks about how we are so focused on the brain when we scientifically know that the brain doesn't create it all. And so for us to then open the door to all of these other ways of thinking is quashed for certain reasons because of capitalistic systems that fund various organizations. It's a long conversation. I am happy to say the APA has started publishing transpersonal research by Cardano, which was the big one. A lot of this research is self-funded. So we don't have grants like the other organizations and the other forms of research that are out there. We need to use our own money to fund our own research in order for things to be published. And that's the way it's been done for a while now because of the systems in place that don't allow these pieces of research to be published.
But is there any chance for integration? Because, I mean, there's wonderful things about CBT.
Yeah.
And how can it be integrated with transpersonal psychology?
It totally could. I think that we have to work in an integrative fashion. That is the holistic way of working, is everything has to be okay because humans are diverse, dynamic creatures. And so what works one day may need to shift another day. And so for us to almost pivot for whatever works for my client requires there be integration. I do hope for change. I hope for change for my kids' generation as well as future researchers on this. I hope for change by, honestly, the APA in terms of like allowing more research to be funded and included in their organization, as well as funding for these big universities that are doing it themselves.
Oh, I think that'd be amazing. So different cultures approach trauma and healing differently.
Yeah.
How does cultural understanding or sensitivity play a role in your therapy approach?
Yeah. So I am actually very fortunate that I went to the school I did because our basis of understanding comes from global communities. And so we did a lot of work looking at shamans and how do shamans work, and looked at swamis and looked at Asian communities and all of these various communities and how did healing occur and what does healing look like there in terms of understanding. I'm now very eclectic. I use indigenous drumming because it really activates that limbic system we talked about earlier. I use various things from all over. And so I'm very fortunate to know that. But being culturally diverse is such a key part of not me personally, but also me professionally. And it really has been really helpful for my clients because you're able to pull things that are not only localized to the United States, but you're able to pull things that maybe happen in indigenous communities. One is a really great one is the use of nature, lying on a bed of grass for someone that's struggling with eating disorders has been shown to be extremely effective, and how Mother Nature can almost work with body-based situations.
Talk about that a little more. That's like a particular interest of mine. What have you seen? And you work with people that struggle with body image as well.
Yeah.
Give me a picture of what you do to help them.
Yeah, I think that, the consciousness piece and the breath work are huge because you elevate yourself beyond the body. And once you elevate yourself beyond the body, which is what happens in a holotropic breathwork, session, you find incredible meaning, self-worth, and you come back to this reality and plane with a better understanding of who you are. And a lot of people let go of the things that they've been holding on to. Body is one of them. And we also do know, like when we start working with like consciousness, there is consciousness in plants. They have a mind, and that's the newest research right now. They have their own sense of consciousness like animals. And so like there is something going on where the research needs to be funded around what is that's helping with body-based issues. Because we know that, you know, when we're out there, when we immerse ourselves in nature, we're seeing changes when it comes to body.
Wow. So you would give them like an exercise or a homework exercise to go out in nature, lie down in a bed of grass, try to, in a sense, kind of detach or leave the body for a moment or join consciousness?
No, in order to be like healed by Mother Nature herself, the act of, you know, either gardening or whatever it is, there is a healing that happens when they are immersed in nature. Holotropic breath work is that transcending experience that allows them to leave their conscious mind and move into their higher self mind and really pull from that non-local consciousness.
That's beautiful. I love that. Now, consciousness requires developing a compassionate relationship with yourself. Why is it so critical in trauma recovery? And how do you help clients cultivate their own self-compassion?
Yeah, I think that all of these transpersonal activities I have found helps clients fall in love with themselves. And so self-compassion becomes a natural byproduct of that. And so what's happening is as they're developing a deeper understanding of who they are authentically, they are falling in love with themselves and they're able to stay aligned to their true self. I think the biggest fear in the world is to be 100% authentic because we operate in a world that doesn't allow us to be. But if we're able to understand and fall in love with that self, it's easier to almost operate from that place.
All right. You said we live in a world that doesn't allow us to be. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, trauma, for example, is I call it the clothing that is trauma clothing that covers the self. I put this on and I'll wear this role. I will put this on and smile and show up in a workplace. I'll put this on and, you know, do this for this person, or act this way in this way. You know, like in this instance. So these are all clothing or pieces that we've adapted for survival. Those are all survival tactics. And the act of almost removing that and not operating from a people-pleasing standpoint, like, for example, is scary for some because they've never been able to do so. And to show up authentically you is very scary for a lot of people. And I think that's a quote from Carl Jung that I'm pulling from, but like that's what he talks about, like being authentic and genuine is the scariest thing.
When you help people become more of their authentic self, what do they experience when they go out into the world and operate from that as opposed to putting on their trauma clothing?
Yeah, limitlessness. That's what the biggest thing I've seen my clients experience. Like they can do anything. The world is a place of joy for the first time. They can create the life they want and almost live the life they want. And it's that alignment to who they are, not just in the future, but in the current time, helps them just move forward.
Wow. Now, going back to cultural practices, was there anything that you drew from your own cultural heritage?
Yeah, I am East Indian. South Indian, South Asian, East Indian. And coming from India, I bring a lot from Vedic psychology. So Vedic psychology is really about the 5 elements and the 5 senses. And so a lot of things I do for my clients is first focus on the 5 senses. What are the 5 senses saying to them in their household? Is there a place for them to somatically relax and exhale? How do they create these places or these areas in their home where they can almost like exhale for the first time and really playing off the five senses, because those are bottom up ways, which is the way we're kind of like feeling the vibe of a room. It's like creating the vibe of a certain space that allows you to be you. And that comes from Ayurvedic psychology, Vedic psychology. So I've pulled from that. I've pulled the drumming is actually a global concept, but the Nagata drum is specifically Indian. So I pull from that. And then, of course, the chakra system and understanding that. And fortunately, it's aligned with somatic therapy. And so we now know that those energy centers are the same as what Peter Levine teaches. And so that's just been, there's been a lot of synchronicity between my culture of, you know, like my culture of origin and the work that I'm doing.
Can you give people a quick picture of that? Because I'm sure if they heard chakras, they were like, what the heck?
Yeah.
But it's really true what she's saying. There is a lot of evidence to show that chakras are actually a real thing. But tell people what that is.
Yeah, so we've got these energy centers in our body. I think there's 7 of them. I'll just focus on, like, if my client is somatically processing something and it's related to the heart chakra, which is right here in the middle of our chest, it's usually neurologically wired to the emotion of sadness or grief. And so we start asking, like, I'm curious if you're feeling any sadness or grief. Or the gut is really anger and fear. And so we know which emotional centers neurologically wire to various organs, as well as different energy centers in our body.
And the gut is your sense of self.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the, energy center of the reproductive organs? What do you see? Because there's a lot of medical intuitives that actually work with chakras to help diagnose what's going on with people just by reading their energy. But tell us about the reproductive chakra.
The reproductive chakra is difficult, honestly, because of trauma. And so it could be various things. So that's why I didn't speak to that. It could be... it could have a narrative. So that's a really powerful chakra because it's the chakra related to sexual abuse at times and other things for my clients. And so that's one I allow my client to define. That's one, there's a lot of curiosity, but I would have a lot of curiosity related to, I would start asking about, reproductive stuff, and other organs that sit there in addition to emotions. Emotions related to trauma.
Wow. All of this is so fascinating. I would love to know, and I think that you are a thought leader in this. You're a thought leader in trauma therapy. Where do you see the field of trauma healing and consciousness work evolving over the next decade?
Yeah, I do know there's quite a bit of funding coming in, self-funded, but there are far more institutions on board, such as Harvard's gotten on board with consciousness science recently, and Johns Hopkins. So there's a lot of schools getting on board with the research. I'm hoping that research gets out there. I hope there's collaborations because transpersonal and consciousness are interdisciplinary. We've got to understand chemistry, biology, and physics to understand transpersonal. And so, like, really the merging of all of these fields together as opposed to being containered has to happen. And I'm hoping in the next 10 years we start seeing that movement.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Well, before we open it up for questions from the audience, I would love to know how people can find you and work with you if they're interested in this type of therapy.
Yeah, they can reach me at holistictraumatherapy.com or theconsciousnesscenter.com.
Wonderful. Are you on any socials as well? They can follow you?
Yeah, I am I'm on Instagram at the Holistic Trauma Therapist. You can find me on Facebook with that URL as well, that handle, and Pinterest as well, Holistic Trauma Therapist.
Lovely. All right. Well, we would love to open it up for some questions. It looks like we have one. Yay.
So I have a 3-parter for you. So my first question is what kind of health issues have you seen reversed using this type of therapy? And then how long did it take to see a reversal? And then my other question was if you can comment on lucid dreaming or like people will talk about like sleepwalking in their sleep. Thank you.
Okay, so I hope I remember this. The first part was what reversal have I seen? One of the really popular ones is chronic pain. Chronic pain that isn't explained by a medical issue. And so using the body and using consciousness really helps move energy that may be trapped there, and allows that to move forward. I've seen that quite a bit in like seniors and seniors coming in, and a lot of doctors sending folks over to me around chronic pain especially. So that's a great example.
And how is it released?
That somatic exercise that we talked about, allowing for emotion to be expressed that may be held in the body. And that's really what we're seeing. What chronic pain is it's something held. There's energy being held in the body there. And bringing awareness to that and allowing that to move through moves the pain through too.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Okay, so she asked you too about lucid dreaming, and so what the heck? What is that, and is that a real thing?
Yeah, lucid dreaming. I am not in dream analysis, but yes, it is a thing. There are people that even do a lot of studies around dreaming. There's different ways. There's even astral projection, and there's a lot of different ways that people do dreaming. But dreaming is a real thing. I will be completely honest, I'm not a professional in the dream world, but definitely is a real thing, and there's a lot of data out there, and dream analysis is definitely a real thing if that's something you're interested in.
And explain to people who don't understand what that is, what lucid dreaming is.
Yeah, lucid dreaming is like a dream that feels like it's almost real, and it's happening while you are awake. And I think that's your definition. Yeah.
And then like you feel like you're astral projecting, like you're walking.
Yes, you're astral projecting or walking somewhere. There's even people who astral project in a different location. So they will project themselves and people will witness them there. So there is that aspect of that as well. Definitely not a professional in that stuff.
Whoa.
But there's definitely a field for that. So
now, you, in the beginning, the first section, you mentioned people who work for the government who are watching other countries. How are they doing this?
They're remote viewers. They're basically psychics. And another great organization is the Arthur Findlay College in the United Kingdom. And those teachers that teach there also talk about being consultants to the Vatican and being consultants to the royal family. And so like this has been going on for a very long time. We just as a population are just not aware of it.
Wow. The fact that it's become declassified is fascinating now.
Yeah.
How can people go and find that information?
It was sent to me by a professor, but I am sure it's out there. I would definitely look at your databases or your school databases out there and try to look for that information. There's definitely transpersonal research out there, and a lot of that quotes the government research, but it's definitely out there for people to research depending on the topic they want to look at.
Right, as Mulder would say, the truth is out there. You guys, this is so fascinating to me, and I am so glad that you've been able to come on this podcast and illuminate some of this really interesting research that's coming out, and to know that you're doing this and helping people resolve their trauma through working through their consciousness is really groundbreaking and fascinating. So I hope you guys follow Seema, read her articles, go work with her if you're in California, if you can. Invite her to come speak, whatever it is, because she's really fascinating. And thank you so much for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. We are looking forward to our next exciting interview, and we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember, the content shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. Follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.